Lee Carroll has been channeling the angelic energies of Kryon since 1989. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guests are Lee Carroll and Monika Muranyi. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California and Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, my special section of the show where I bring on my very special guests. And today I've got two wonderful guests, and you might be familiar with them. I've got Lee Carroll and Monika Muranyi. They're a team that share the messages and teachings of Kryon. Lee's relationship with Kryon began in 1989 when he experienced a profound, loving energy that awakened him to the understanding that God was bigger than anything he was ever told. And Lee has produced 14 Kryon books. He's the co-author of 3 books on Indigo Children. And these Indigo books introduced the world to the term Indigo Children in 2000, spawning many follow-up books by various authors, a movie documentary, lots of interest worldwide. Lee is the original channel for Kryon, has been recognized by the Delphi Metaphysical University, with an honorary doctorate of science, transpersonal psychology, and metaphysics, and he's considered one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. Monika Muranyi began her journey with Lee in 2012. She launched her first book, The Gaia Effect, and went on to publish 3 more books from the vast collection of Kryon channels. She's masterfully helped tie together the complex subject of who we are and why we are here, and she's posed dozens of questions to Kryon that provide us with greater understandings and realizations about our esoteric truths. Their partnership in the Kryon work has resulted in producing 3 illustrated oracle card decks, 2 Kryon phone apps, and a weekly online gathering of old souls who participate in the Healing Wednesday program. We'll get into the websites and all that stuff afterwards, but let's start right now, right here on Guys Radio and TV, with Lee Carroll and Monika Muranyi. Welcome to the show.
Yay! Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here, and what a wonderful introduction.
I know, and thanks, Robert. We had to tell your listeners and your viewers that we are so used to interviewing people. It's just odd. Occasionally, we get to be on other people's show. So we are, we're normally used to throwing questions out instead of answering them. But thank you. And I know that a lot of people are going to wonder, what the heck is channeling?
And what is the heck is
Kryon?
And
what have you done having these people on your show? What's going on here?
Well, let's start right at the beginning then. I mean, Lee, you've been channeling Kryon since 1989. Tell our listeners who are not familiar with you or Kryon, who is Kryon? Is it an entity, a collective, an aspect of source? And how did Kryon first show up in your life?
I would say that the short version, and there generally isn't one, but I'm an engineer. I still am an engineer. People have a funny idea about those who are spiritual and have become something from something else. There was no conversion. As you said, God just got bigger for me, if you want to even call it God, the creative source. And I learned so much in that, I would say, those couple of years when this started happening to me. It's another story. But channeling is simply a stream of intuition. And the best people and the best channelers are artists, musicians, composers, painters of all kinds, photographers. When you start channeling something, especially music and composition, if you are into that, you know what I'm talking about. It just comes. And suddenly you got a song, or suddenly you do this or do that. It's very similar to that. It's not necessarily spooky. I don't sit and my head doesn't spin around and pea soup come out and all of those things. It's a flow of intuition. In my case, it's a flow from what they call the other side of the veil. I get wonderful, loving, compassionate, kind, spiritual information about a very loving God, and it's not filled with rules. It's not doom and gloom. It doesn't have a doctrine. We're not a cult. And this has been very successful for us, meaning that the listenership realize it's a safe place to be. It's just filled with good advice. And just lately, we realize why it happened at all. It comes from not an entity, and you pegged it. it's kind of a group energy, you might say that, because when you get out of the three dimension we're in or think we're in, and you start looking at multidimensional things, there are no three-dimensional rules. So you ask, who is it? Well, in a multidimensional space, there is no place. Everything is everywhere. One is many, many is one. It's one of these things that even physicists struggle with. And so you can't really say who or what. It just feels like, let's call it an angelic feel. So an angel can be everywhere at the same time, just like we were taught from kids God can be. And so that's how it feels to me. And the information is always loving, is always compassionate and kind, never accusatory. But it's still until you can experience it, and there's easy ways to do that, and we can give you some sources if you want to. But basically, that is what it is.
Now, what was the first time that Kryon contacted you? How old were you? What was happening? What did you think? What did you feel? How did you process that?
That's good for a whole program. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do that whole question answered literally 45, I think. It might have been a little later. It's at a point in my life when I had a career, I was happy with it, I was successful, there was no issues. I wasn't in trouble. So many times, spiritual things happen to you when you're in trouble, or you have big ahas or changes of life because you had to make some change in what you do. It wasn't the case at all. I was married to a woman. Jan Tober is her name. She's no longer my wife, but she's a wonderful partner. And Monica, we see her almost every week, and she was exceptionally metaphysical. I would say to you back then, I would have said she's exceptionally spooky, because that's what it looked like to me. Metaphysics didn't look normal to me back there as an engineer working an engineer job. In my particular engineering, it was electronics, it was audio, it was sound, all of these things. So I had a studio, engineering, many commercials and movie scores and all these things. So I had no um, I had actually no interest in anything that she had interest in, and I had an agreement with her, and that was stay away from the woo-woo. We can be married, and we can be happy, just stay away from the woo-woo. It didn't work out. So what happened is she took me to a channeler, and then that was an interesting situation. 3 years later, she took me to another channeler. That's as close as I wanted to get. Every 3 years, she could take me to a spooky guy. And both of them said the identical phrase, and I found this out later listening to the tapes. And the phrase was, "There's a magnetic master," which I didn't understand what that is, "named Kryon trying to get a hold of you." Now, Kryon is not a very angelic name. It's closer to the name of rust preventative spray paint, which is Krylon.
Right,
So
right.
I was not, I was amused. Oh, really? Is Captain Zoom in there too, or maybe Mother Mary? They want to talk to me. It was not something I even believed in. However, suddenly I had a puzzle, a logic puzzle. Two men who didn't know each other, 40 years difference in age, in two different places, said the same identical phrase. Now, how do you justify that? And the answer is you really can't. There is no logic puzzle or slide rule or anything else that's going to lead you to the answer of how. How does that happen? So I'm one of these guys that likes the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And so what I did was to sit down in a chair. And I did this when Jan Tober, my wife at the time, was not looking, because I didn't want to give her any hope that maybe I was getting strange. And in the chair, I actually said to the chair, looking back to it, I said, "If you're there, show me. I'll give you one chance." Sat down in the chair, and immediately something happened. I didn't get voices. I didn't get converted. I didn't get suddenly spiritual. I wept. I felt so much love and compassion come through my body that it shocked and surprised me. It's not like I hadn't felt love before, but not this, not like this. And it was so shocking to me that it was such a cause and effect, and I had just challenged the chair, that I popped out and actually was angry that it was real. I mean, go figure. But I continued doing it, and that led to messages starting to come in very softly, very gradually, and in a way that was hard for me. Today, I just sit and channel when it's appropriate, and back then it was a kind of a stream of consciousness. And I know you've had some other channelers on the show,
Yes.
but you have it was started to repeat itself. I had to remember it and give it back. In other words, the communication was not smooth, and it wasn't a flow. It is now, but that took 3 years, maybe 4. And then there were levels that happened over the 33 years I've been channeling, where it got more comfortable, where the subject matter shifted and changed a little, where it got a little more pointed. And then the reason for the whole thing is something we can discuss if you want to, which is what we're going through right now, and it's called the shift. So that, in a nutshell, and believe me, that's the short version, is what happened back then. I left my job maybe 5 years after that happened, and because things just started happening. That's when I started understanding and learning also about synchronicity, the law of attraction, the kinds of things that you probably have heard about, where we actually believe that we can, in some ways, by expectations and affirmations and how we think, actually create a path in front of us which is benevolent, and synchronicity happens for us. And we know that's true because the people who do the opposite bring sorrow and grief to them, and negative things. So you just watch it. Those who expect disease will probably get it. Those who complain a lot will probably attract complainers. And so you just find your group, and quite often you'll start to see how this works. And we have seen this over and over. It's just part of our teaching.
Okay, one more question for you, Lee, then I want to get Monica involved. But so when do you kind of have appointment with Kryon, or could you be, going through Trader Joe's and it's like, okay, incoming, how does it work? Because, when you talked about musicians, I was reading Keith Richards' autobiography, and he says, when I get something, it's like incoming, and he'll run to the studio and put a track down and then put it aside and then maybe come back to it later. How does Kryon kind of get your attention, or do you get his attention?
It's the same way. It's exactly the same way. Keith was absolutely correct. Remember, my life before Kryon was working with musicians. I got to see channeling over and over in composition, in lyrics. I used to score films, and as an engineer, not as a composer, and watched some of the best composers come from Los Angeles. And if you missed a cue, meaning that you're writing music for a big production, and they'll give you these little 10 and 15-second things to write music to, and every once in a while they'd skip one. And I watched this guy write a cue for music for the whole orchestra in a very sensitive scene without, with 15 seconds notice. And it would come in the door with FedEx, and they'd play it, and he'd start scribbling. And then the orchestra would then do it, and the copyist would be there. And it was like, how did you do that? Because it would just flowed out of him. And I saw it there first. The answer to that question is, it comes when it comes. Now, there used to be appointments to give it, and that meaning that people would show up. This was before YouTube and everything else, long before that, and we would do it and have up to a few years ago, we would travel all the time, every week, a new audience, a new city, all these things, and we would track these people, and we'd sit down, and it would be part of the event. However, it's not when I would normally get the information. I would get it perhaps before that, in the middle of the night. You're right. There's no true, you can't say, I want it now. What happens now to me, however, is Kryon is with me 24/7. So it's always available. Whether or not I put it out at that time is another story. I can tell you about that more. There's appropriate and inappropriate times to channel. However, Keith was right. And I love it that you pulled it back to musician, because that's where I first saw it and saw the process in the creatives.
Okay, great answer. Fantastic stuff here. Guys Radio, my special guest channel Lee Carroll, who channels Kryon and Monika Muranyi. Now, there's so much information. There's so much content. I mean, I'm listening and watching and reading, and the good news is there's so much that's available to everybody, because as I was listening to Kryon just yesterday, he wants the information to be available and accessible to everyone. So if you dig around, you can get every single bit of channeling that's been done. So Monica, my question to you is, you came and connected with Lee back in 2012, and you are the archivist for all of Kryon's work. Tell us how that occurred and the challenges you must go through, and so much content. To how do you decide how to kind of sort it all out, and how to present it, and how to be the archivist for it, because it's amazing work that you do.
Well, thank you so much. And you really have to understand that we each come onto the planet with unique gifts, and we have the ability to do some things really well and other things not so well. Some things you can learn as a learned skill, but inherently for me, I think I'm a Sagittarian, but I have about one part of Virgo in me. And that's important for the question that you just asked. How do you go about looking at 30 years worth of information and compiling it into categories to make it available? So as a kid, I used to love getting my M&Ms, and I would put them, open the packet, and I would put all the green ones together in a pile, the blue ones together in a pile, put them all into their color groups. And then I would start eating them, but then I'd start counting the numbers. Well, I have 6 in this group and 4 in here. So now I'm going to eat 2 in that group and have them, eat down in a mathematical way, in color-coded way. So this is crazy. What kid does that? But it was just my natural way of perceiving the world and interacting with it, where I would want to automatically create order from the chaos that I saw.
Amazing.
And so 15 years, I actually worked as a ranger in the national parks in both Australia, and I did a little time in New Zealand as well. And I loved this job. I loved being in nature and hiking. However, there was also this ability of me to organize things within that role as well. So, for example, we had all sorts of books and information scattered everywhere. And for me, it was important that new rangers coming on could access the information quickly. So I would go about organizing books for the interpretation notes, organizing the library. There was one place where I started where they had done various types of tree planting over the years, and the methods had changed, but no one had documented it. So I found it was very important to not only go back in history, find photos, document what types of tree planting were done, what method, what was the success rate, so that we had a continuity of what was the overall objective, but then also think of what's the future strategy here of what types of trees we should bring in and plant, and what's the overall picture. So now you have a peek into how I'm naturally always existing in my world.
Well, you
It's
do.
not that hard. It's not that hard to then look at everything that Kryon has said, which is so vast. I mean, oh my gosh. It goes from so much information in a love-based mode to high physics, ones where sometimes Lee and I, we don't even understand what Kryon's saying, because it's really high level of physics information. So like anything, Robert, is you begin with what you're passionate with. And for me, my passion was the earth, Gaia, the planet. And the fact that we have this incredible partnership. She is alive in sentience. And yet, who learns that at school? We don't learn that. I didn't learn that as a ranger, that there is this partnership within our very DNA. We share this relationship with the planet. And so that's where I began first. And I looked to Kryon and all of the information Kryon had ever given about this relationship between humanity and the earth, and pulled that together to produce, as you already described, the first book, The Gaia Effect. And so, it snowballs from there.
Let's continue on that, because talk about synchronicity. My next question was going to be and will be about our connection with Gaia. And let me give you a little background. Through my meditations recently, I've been told to you realize that, the earth is going to exist with or without you. And you have to, the earth, humans are on earth and we have a connection with earth. And earth is like our friend and our mother and something that's very, very important and not to be taken for granted. So I started meditating, adding in my meditation to ask Gaia to allow me to send my any type of virus, disease, tension, stress, whatever, toxins for transmutation into Gaia. And I've been giving kind of the okay on that. So I include that every day. So one of the things then I learned about Kryon's teaching recently as I was prepping for the show is that this relationship, as you described, Monica, about our relationship with Earth and how we kind of have it backwards. Earth isn't there to really serve us. We're part of Earth and we need to respect Mother Gaia. And it's a great learning. And I think it's very important for people on this planet to start to get with that. Could you both elaborate on that, please?
I would love to. And one of the first things that I want to bring up is that physically, from a physical standpoint, our body system, we are also electrical. And I love that we recently interviewed on our Healing Wednesday program a gentleman who has pioneered something called earthing. Now, he worked in the cable industry and realized that you need to do grounding when it comes to electricity. There's always a grounding pin. And then he had this aha moment where for humans, we should be also grounding with the earth on a daily basis. And yet, so many of us are insulated with the shoes that we wear, with the concrete we walk on, with the homes that we live in. And he began to do studies where just 30 minutes barefoot on the ground can rapidly transform your health. Now, he went on to develop a grounding blanket that you can use and many other devices, but the point is that our bodies need the earth for grounding. One step more, I'll get Lee to talk about the magnetics because the role of magnetics is incredibly important, and then this comes into the magnetic master. But I love that you talked about transmuting negative energies into the planet because this is actually spot on. I also have been trained in some energy work. It's called the electromagnetic field balancing technique. And so we have within our energy anatomy these infinity loops that come out of our feet, connecting into the center below, which goes into the earth. So there is a mechanism where we can send out into the earth all of those negative emotions and receive back. It becomes transmuted in Mother Gaia, and then it becomes available to you as new energy. So I would encourage anyone tuning into this to adopt that practice Robert was talking about. And I would just add one more thing is if you can go and do that when you're actually feet in the dirt or feet in the sand, or even if it's just holding a plant in your hands or having a flower in front of you and exchanging your oxygen and carbon with each other, to have that and just feel into whether that changes anything for you or not. But I want Lee now to chime in about how important the magnetic field is for life on the planet and how it demonstrates 100% with science that we are partnership with the planet. Yeah.
Let me add one question to that, Lee, for your response, and that is one of the recent channelings that Kryon came through was about that people, if we are electrical and magnetic, that we can live a lot longer than we give ourselves credit for, and we kind of create our own demise. So if you could incorporate that in your response, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, they're actually two different subjects. I'd rather go to that one first, but even before that one, I would like to continue with what Monica said, because the fellow who we interviewed was named Clint Ober, and one of the things that I'll never forget is that in that whole grounding thing that makes so much sense that I'd never really thought of, he was saying, look at the pets. They get the human diseases. They're with you all the time. They get the cancers, whatever. In the wild, they don't. And so that they're not catching it from us because it's not, contagious. So many of our diseases, and including arthritis, many, but they're with us and they're ungrounded. And that was, I went, yeah. I mean, somebody ought to look at that. How come the ones in the wild don't and the ones with us do? And it's not necessarily what they eat, because that's the first thing people go to, even if you feed them good stuff. So there's a lot to be said for grounding. Now, this other thing about living longer, our bodies are designed to regenerate. And that, you cut yourself and it heals up. It all is. And medicine and all that we're told, that changes over time. Some of the absolutes that we were given when we were kids have reversed themselves. So medicine does its best for us, and I believe they do. Nobody's trying to trick us, except the commercials on TV after 10. No, they everybody wants you to buy everything they have. But in general, our medical professionals are doing their best to help us. And yet, the information they receive from research is only as good as they can give us. And there's new discoveries all the time. Now, what Kryon said 30 years ago, every cell of the body can regenerate. That's brain cells. That's controversial. There are some other cells that we were told don't, and now, oops, we find that they do. But you don't find that they do them all the same. So sometimes we beat them up. We beat up the whole process by, again, what we eat or what we don't eat, and that then it traces right back to diet. However, in general, the body is designed for at least 120 years. Now, the evidence of this is in several places on the earth. Good friend Greg Braden, been to Tibet many times. He talks about the lineage of the Tibetans, even in rarefied oxygen situations, are living that long, regularly living past 100 and healthy. We see it in some of the Indian gurus, way past 100 and healthy. And you look at, say, well, what's the difference? And I've just gave you a couple of those things. But the basics is we are designed to live a long time. We are usually slowly committing suicide by two things: what we eat and what we think. And consciousness now is being discovered as energy. How would you define consciousness right now? If you were in front of a teacher and you had to write an essay, define consciousness. It's tough. It's really tough. I mean, even if you go to what Plato said and all the other things, it's still a little mamsy-pamsy. You can't really get your hand around it. What is it? It's something that floats around and you think it or don't think it. It's energy. We now have proven, that's a whole nother story, on this planet, scientifically, consciousness is energy. So it can be treated with formulas, and like any other parts of physics, there are measurements, and it affects other things. So that is the reasoning that we are starting to see that now has legs. I'll say, when I started all this channeling of business and Kryon talked about how we think is what's going to be in front of us. How we think actually creates a paved road or an unpaved road in front of us. And that was just like the power of positive thinking. It was just an idea. Now we know it's energy. And so we're starting to figure out how to use it. Part of that is synchronicity, being in the right place at the right time, having the things come to you that should, having the people in your lives come to you who should, instead of having to go through relationships numbers of times until you get it right, or jobs until you get it right, or friends until you get it right. And it seems like a turkey shoot to a lot of people, and that's called luck. I'll tell you, luck is when you don't use the tools of consciousness. Luck just happens to you if you're not aware of how to make it better. And that's what we teach in this health thing and the human body, and it's designed to survival. You can actually use that energy of consciousness to talk. Are you ready? Are you ready to turn this program off? Now he's gone too far. Talk to your cells.
I'm ready to turn it up.
Yeah, talk to your cells. CELLS.
Yes.
Talk to them. Consciousness is powerful. And let me just give you something. This is Lee Carroll. I'm a senior. I can go back and tell you what it was, 70 years ago when I was smaller. And in that time, literally, we were trained that we all live up here. This is a box called our head. And we look down at our bodies and we just hope it works because it's luck. We'll either catch diseases or not, or something will happen or it won't. And so everything was just out of our hands. Now we're starting to understand that the energy of consciousness can go right into our bodies. Our bodies are meant to just work, but they can be enhanced by our energy. Can we love our bodies? Can we? And that sounds strange, but yes, I talk to my cells all the time. Kryon described it once. He says it's like a system waiting for the boss. And if you never talk to it, it just does what it does and does its best in the environment that it was born in. And that's as good as it gets. And then we die soon. But if you are constantly working with it energetically, it'll last far, far longer. You know, surgeons know this. They watched some very seniors in their 90s keep themselves alive for like 3 years or more to watch their grandkids graduate. And then they pass right after it. I mean, how does that happen? How do you explain that? Other people have had spontaneous remissions and have gotten rid of a lot of kinds of diseases and actually controlled their own healing process when they start talking to their cells. The Indian gurus have said this forever. And you find this in the indigenous. They've talked about it in their own language for a very long time, as well as telling us how the Gaia is their partner. What if there were some ancient secrets that were just now starting? There weren't secrets back then, but they seem to be to us because the modern society throws them away because we've got all this modern stuff. So we're starting to discover that the indigenous had some great, great stuff. And also that we're discovering some very basic things that we can control to some degree, our body's health, the cellular structure, and how it proceeds in life.
Fantastic. Guys Radio, my special guests are Lee Carroll and Monika Muranyi. We're talking about Kryon. We're talking about the world we live in right now. And a big topic I'd like to cover that Kryon gets into is this shift. And he's mentioned that it's amazing that we kind of got past 2012 and here we are now, and people talk about a big shift, and a lot of folks are saying, well, some of us are going to go to the fifth dimension and others are kind of agreed to stay in the third dimension. Is going to be kind of a break off. And then in the meantime, the world that we live in right now, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of stress on the systems that had been put in place years ago, and people are freaking out, and some people are and some people aren't. So big question, Lee and Monika, what is going on? What does Kryon advise us to do about what is happening in the world today? What do we need to know?
Well, I think it's clear that the shift is here, we're in it. And so you can no longer say, when is the shift coming? Many are now saying, when's it going to be over? That's now we've moved into that big question of, when is this going to be over? Because what we are seeing is exactly what you described. And if you were to look at the 2012, when we were told that it's the end of the world and it's the end of the Mayan calendar, I want to just remind everyone that the Mayans had calendars out to the year 4000 and beyond. What 2012 represented was the end of a long count. Now, the long count in the Mayan calendar system, it's a period of around 5,000 years, and it represents, guess what? A creation cycle. So 2012 marks the end of a creation cycle and the beginning of a very brand new creation cycle. But it's not just the beginning of a new creation cycle. When Lee was down in Mexico at Xochicalco and looked at the glyphs that are on the walls there, the prophecies was that if humanity was to make it past 2012, we would begin to enter the period of highest consciousness that the planet has ever seen. However, it's not an automatic thing where someone just turns on the light, we have this highest consciousness, peace on earth, and let's go. We're in that process of evolution, of a consciousness evolution, And we're beginning to have things exposed that have always been there, and yet the reaction to it is so completely different. Are there things happening right now on the planet where you just shake your head and think, how can this happen? It's unconscionable. And many are throwing it back to the 1940s and 50s, and some are even expecting another World War III. And yet Kryon is very, very clear, is that history will no longer repeat itself. We are on a new track. That calendar, that creation cycle, has created a new creation cycle on a completely new track, so that we're going into a new future where those old energy items are falling away, and yet they know it, so they are flailing like a child when you say no, and they kick and scream and want to have what they want, knowing that it can't happen. That is what this old energy that we're seeing is exhibited. So it's a little like your teenage kid's room where they've finally gone to a friend's house for a weekend, and you're in there, okay, great, it's time to clean up. And you open the curtains, because it's always dark because they're on the video. And you open the curtains, you put on the light, and you look around and you are horrified at what you see. It's always been there. It's just been covered up in the dark. So when you put a spotlight onto things, it illuminates the things that need to be cleaned up. And so this is a metaphor I'm using here. When you start to have higher consciousness level, it's an illumination of light, more light than what there ever was. And so it exposes things that we are no longer happy with. The Me Too movement is an example of this. So there's going to continue to be this cycle of exposing what needs to be cleaned up, and it's no longer good enough to sweep it under the carpet. It's time to address it. And you can see that globally, there is more compassion and caring for each other than there ever was before. Did you want to add, Lee, to my
Well, you've done a great job, but basically, I want just to tell everybody, this is right on schedule. The indigenous said it was coming, and it's not just some prophecy in the sky. This is astronomy. It's called the precession of the equinoxes,
Yeah.
which is a term that you would have to understand astronomy and astrology to get it. But basically, it's around a 26,000-year wobble we have of the Earth, and the indigenous saw it in the sky, and it's become a marker. But not just to them. How many of you remember through the years that we were all told in scriptures, several scriptures, and some even channeling 50 years ago, that we were headed for the end in about 2000 or 2001 or 2? And that came and went, and we had a couple of things, Y2K, we had the 9/11 experience, but we didn't have a world war. And what we have instead, I mean, the marker was there, and it was interpreted so many ways, whether it was going to be the end of the world or the beginning of another one. Everybody who's waiting for it to return to the way it was, it isn't going to. Flat out, is not going to. Guys, get ready for new ways of working, if you haven't already picked that up. And this whole thing with COVID what if I told you that was something like stopping a factory, remarkably on time, and it has changed the way we work. It's changed the way we have social interaction. It may have changed the way we manage things. It's changed our families, where we can live, where we don't live. Everything has been stirred up. It's not coming back. The whole idea of 2 years of zooming to each other and your colleagues and all has turned out to be the way management is going to be. So if you're thinking about going back to work, unless you're working in a factory, you may already know that this is changing that. So this is hard for a culture to have it all stirred up by these things and then come back thinking it's all going to be lovely the way it was. It's going to be more than lovely. You're going to get used to something that's going to be better, and that's the idea. I have to look at what's going on now, and I'm going to go back to what Monika said. Was anybody shocked at the 1943 event that we just had in the last couple of months? That's what it looks like to everybody. Say, what? What? And you're looking at just almost a return to the old energy of war. It looks like it, feels like it, awful. The horror is there, just like we saw it in our movies. And if almost the entire world has reacted in a way that said, no, no, this is not acceptable. No matter who is allied with whom, it's not acceptable. When Switzerland, neutral forever, says, no, we're taking sides. When even China, who was poised on perhaps now is a time when we could attack Taiwan and and nobody's going to notice, is holding back and going, oh, maybe we ought to weigh on this later. This tells you something. Something is very, very different. It's not your grandfather's world anymore. It's not the history that often repeats itself, and we go to war and war and war. This is what the prophecies of so many indigenous said could happen. Are we going to have a higher version of consciousness? So what does that really mean? It means we care more about each other. But more than that, practical. What does it mean? It means that worldwide, we all want the same thing. We don't want to be hungry. We don't want to be dying early. We want good education for our children. We want peace, and we want some form of happiness, which would be a peaceful world, not constantly at war with each other, especially not what's going on today. I've been to Russia 8 times. I've been to the Ukraine twice. I've stood where the bombs are falling today. That society was just like yours. There were strip malls, there were people who love each other, and right across the border is their relatives who've just attacked them. And I don't want to get into the politics of it. I just say it's wrong. And everybody looks at it and goes, something's weird here. And that is that old energy that Kryon talked about, that Monika just remarked on, that looks like it wants to stay here and it'll do anything to bring us back to what it was. Imagine a reestablishment of the way it was in the 50s with the Soviet bloc, with the countries there, with mutual destruction, all of these things. No, that's not what's going to happen, folks. So stand by for some surprises, because they're coming. Kryon says 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. You're moving into a new normal, one that's better than you had before, and some inventions are coming as well. It's in the field. You can feel it. And that's a whole nother subject, Robert, that I can get into. But don't you find it odd that the inventions of the planet, the big ones, flight, only happened a little while ago? Chinese have been flying kites for 1,000 years. We've been doing balloons and everything, watching birds. And yet it's only been a little while ago that we went, oh, maybe we could do it too. And then we only beat the French by 2 weeks. The Wright brothers beat the French by 2 weeks. In other words, all happening on the world at the same time. Discovery radio, all the world at the same time. It's still debatable who discovered it or who invented it. So we are hitting another cusp where some inventions are coming, where we are going to be able to produce electricity easy, without coal, without hydro, without anything. I won't give it away. We'll be able to have crops grow up to 7-fold what they are now, without GMOs, without any downside. It's always been there, but we're now going to start getting it, and that serves the world at peace.
Fantastic.
It won't be weaponized. And that is the hope that we give. That's what Kryon has said. That's where we sit right now. But no wonder people are having trouble right now, because you've got a war, you've got a different kind of work. Your culture is shifting. It's not what your father experienced. So what do we do? And the answer is we all are saying, I want it back to normal. But it's really not going to go back to that kind of normal. It's going to get better. You just got to reinvent yourself a little bit.
Fantastic. My special guests, and I love this show so much. I hope we can do it again. Lee Carroll, Monika Monika Muranyi. The websites are Kryon, Kryon.com, KryonMasters.com, Monika Muranyi, Muranyi.com, and you do a Healing Wednesdays. Just we're running out of time, but tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap it up.
It's easy. It's easy. KryonMasters.com will get you right to it. It's a show every single week. Very, very affordable. And one of the shows is free on YouTube the first week of the month.
Okay, sounds fantastic. And it sounds like we just have to hang in there, that good things are coming. We have to be patient, and we have to have faith, and we have to believe in ourselves and respect the planet. So thank you so much, Lee. Thank you so much, Monica. I hope we can do it again. If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week on Guys Radio and TV, please support us by subscribing to our channels. Thanks.